I'm Max Sandlin. I'm a theologian who loves art.
I'm Tessa Davidson. I'm an artist who loves theology.
And this is Our First Word.
Theology of Beauty.
Tessa, I have a question for you.
What's that?
We always talk about this thing being more beautiful than that thing, or that thing being more beautiful than this thing. But in an earlier episode, we said that beauty was a name for God, and God can't be more God than God.
Right.
So isn't it true that every experience of beauty is equal? The most beautiful thing you've ever seen or experienced or done is equal to the pattern the soap scum makes on the shower if you have eyes to see it. Is that true?
Ooh, good question. Here's what I'm struggling with. I think our initial response to that would be like, well, that doesn't seem right because we seem to experience it at different levels and in different amounts. So just our subjective experiences through life as we make our way through life, things hit us in different ways. And we have these like special outpourings in certain times and moments. And so it would seem like we can experience beauty in different degrees. That's what it seems like.
Okay, so I want to watch our language. You said it seems
Oh,
like
boy.
no. I think the way you said it was careful, and I think that's gonna be helpful. We can experience beauty in different degrees,
Right.
But you didn't say there are different degrees.
Right. Yep.
So you're talking now about our subjective experience. So the question is not like, is the Sistine Chapel more beautiful than a pine cone? Is not what you're trying to answer. You're trying to answer, I experience the beauty of the Sistine Chapel more than I experience the beauty of a pine cone. I'm assuming here that you do find the Sistine Chapel more beautiful than a pine cone.
I have studied pine cones, and if you look and you study the golden
course
ratio
you
within the pine cones, it's incredible. Like these things are little masterpieces sitting in front of us because of, look at how they're oriented and how every single little piece of them. There's a mathematical beauty to how all of that is arranged. But that being set aside, we experience beauty to a different degree. And I'm trying to also connect this thought with holiness. We experience God's holiness to different degrees, and he even makes that manifest in different ways. You know, when we think about how he created these spots to where we have like these thin places where we can experience God's holiness, like in the Holy of Holies, or as we approach the tabernacle. When we think about Moses' experience with the burning bush, God was with him always, but he had this special encounter with God that I think is not to be overlooked. So, yeah, I would relate it back to the experience, but is it just semantics at that point?
So let's ask that question. Was God more present in the burning bush than he was 2 mountains over? And my instinct is to say, yeah, he was. Moses walks up and God's like, take off your shoes. This is holy ground, implying that over there ain't holy ground.
Right, yeah.
There are like loci, locusts, right? Not the bugs. Like there are points at which God's presence is concentrated.
Yes.
Maybe. Terence Fretheim talks about this, that there is, he calls the general presence of God, what theologians have called omnipresence for years, right? God is everywhere and everything, and God's not like more of God is in the ocean than is in a speck of dust. Let me see if I can illustrate this. All right, so one time my youngest child, Judah, was going to bed, and he said to me, he likes to ask theological questions at bedtime because he knows, Dad's a sucker and I can stay up later. So he was like, Dad, God's like really big, right? And I said, well, yeah, that's right. He's really big. He goes, he's got to be really big because we're all in him. Mm. And I said, yes, that's true, but not how you mean it. It's not like we're in God's knee and the planet Saturn is in his fingernail. He's not a colossal giant that the universe, is full of. Like the old line that, the sky is blue because the world exists inside, the eyeball of a blue-eyed giant. It's not that sort of thing. So we're all in God, but not because God's a giant. Then Judah goes, but also God's got to be really little because he's in everything. And I was like,
man,
that is
wow, he's
right,
pretty
bro.
astute.
Yeah, Augustine writes about this and says, we ought not to imagine that when we encounter an elephant, we're encountering more of God than when we encounter a mouse. When Augustine talked about it, he thought maybe it's like God is like an ocean, right? And the universe is a sponge such that it's in the ocean and the ocean is full of it. But he says that's almost right, but it's not right because, of course, half of the sponge has more ocean in it than, a little tiny piece of the sponge. And that's not how it is. He says, look, when you encounter God, you always encounter all of God. This is the idea that God doesn't have parts, that God's not something that you can encounter a piece of. So when we say like, oh, that was a spark of divinity in there, implying that somewhere else there's this full flame, as if God has these little pieces.
Right. Yeah.
So theologically, we don't want to say that there's more God in an elephant than a mouse because of the elephant's bigger.
Or a lion more than a frog.
Yeah, and of course he's more a lion than a frog. Frogs are from the devil. My co-host cannot handle
serpents. I mean, maybe we could talk about Leviathan, but
yeah, okay. I do. Now Leviathan's a dragon. That's the coolest thing. But the point that my son Judah and Augustine are making is about size, and that's not the point we're making.
Yeah.
Or the point that Terence Fretom is making in his little book about God's suffering, which I used to 100% agree with, and now I'm sad because I don't agree with it, but I really liked it. Anyway, this part I do think is right. He talks about God's theophonic presence. Theophany means like when God shows up. God's present in some special way. So I think we're in a podcast studio this morning, and I think God is present in this room with us. There are 2 or more, even 3, our secret engineer over there, gathered in the room, and God is present with us. Christ is present with us in this room. How much of God? That's a nonsensical question. All of God. There is no how much of God. It's God is not composed of parts like us. So God is fully present in the podcast studio, in these microphones and wires and couches and whatever. But if you said to me, is God as present in this room as he is in the bread of communion, than when the church is taking it? Oh, no. He's more present. But I mean something metaphorical by that more. What Fretom says is, think about light as a metaphor for this. Here we are in a room, and I can see everything in the room because the light is bouncing around. There's, all these, quadrillions of photons shooting around the room, and there's light all in the room. But it's also the case that if I point to, the bulbs on the ceiling, I say, but the light is more there than it is on the table. And so he talks about an intensification of God's presence. And he says these theophanies, or I might say something like the sacraments, like, the communion bread or something, these are intensifications of God's presence, and therefore there's a special kind of holiness. Now, we ought not, I think, make a theological leap from that to say that because it's the same God with no parts who is present in the burning bush or in the very flesh of Christ, say, or in the sacrament of communion, then somehow God is less present in the sunrise. But there's also something right about saying that, right?
Right.
I know I'm talking on both sides of my mouth here, but there's a difference in like a laser beam and light diffused throughout the room, even if it's the same number of photons. And one of them will blind you and one of them will make you see. So I think that's right about God's presence. All right, now that's all the theological background. What about beauty? Well, if we think beauty is a name for God, and we think that God's presence can be more intensified or more clearly perceived, maybe less occluded than normal, then we might say this particular piece of art is a greater intensity of beauty than others, even though beauty does not have parts. If you see beauty in the soap scum, then that's beauty. That's God. You've really encountered the thing itself and not a small piece of it. You've seen a glimpse of it. So this makes me think I'm trying to thread the needle because I don't want to just say it's only our experience. There's something right about saying that like, no. A sunset is more beautiful than soap scum, even though we encounter the fullness of what we call beauty in both if we have eyes to see it.
Yeah.
We just have a hard time having eyes to see.
Well, okay. Let me do some ask a follow-up question there, because I think this is really fascinating, and I'm trying to sort this out myself. I was actually just reading Pope John Paul II's accounts of beauty last night, and he was making connections with Jesus was speaking to the man. He said, "Why do you call me good? There's no one good but God."
Mm-hmm.
And he said we could almost exchange that same encounter and say, "Why do you call me beautiful? There's no one beautiful but God." So God is beautiful, but we would not point to that over there, that pine cone, and say that is capital B beauty, because that's not God.
That'd be an idolatry, right?
Right. And so we can't point to the thing and say that is beauty. We could say that is beautiful, or like beauty passes through it. The stream of beauty passes through it. And so that would be how we would talk about it. And just more of a clarification. So what you're trying to articulate is that we can experience lesser degrees of God's beauty as it passes through objects and as we perceive them in design and artistic works and acts of humility, and we can experience it to greater degrees. Is that fair to summarize?
Yeah, I think that's right. If I have a small straw and I put it in a tiny little rivulet of water, I might be able to drink all the water that's coming through here, even though I know that water goes all the way up to a great river and down to all that kind of stuff, right? But I've got a tiny straw and I've got a tiny rivulet of water. In the metaphor, the straw is like my ability to take in beauty, my subjectivity, and the water is the stream of beauty. I like how you said that,
Yeah.
right? I could put maybe someone who's cultivated or been gifted with more eyes to see from God, to greater experience beauty and appreciate it. They take an art appreciation class and like, oh yeah, I better appreciate this. Or they practice being still and mindful and paying attention to things. They might have a bigger straw, right, than someone else. I think what I'm trying to say is there's also things like the Mississippi River. It carries more water.
Right.
And there are things at which, by God's gracious will and by our cooperating with divine revelation, we can create artifacts or moments or performances or whatever, in which performances meaning things like giving a beggar all your money or whatever, right? Beautiful acts like that, ethical acts too. But like we can do things in which we not only like put a bigger straw down, we expand the channel so that God is present in a rock, but it's a sin to worship that rock. It's right to look and go, oh, that's beautiful. God's passing through this. This has existence. I can see God in and through this, but I wouldn't give it worship.
And that's where the idolatry is.
Right.
Yep.
But like the molecules of Jesus's feet, the flesh of Christ, this incarnation, the apostles fall down and worship him. Now, this is a fun debate. Do they worship his body? Do they worship his soul? No, they only worship the one whole, but certainly the physicality of it is there. And the foot of Christ, like if you touch the foot of Christ, you are encountering God in his fullness in a way that you're not if you touch a rock, even though God has no parts. This feels like I'm speaking paradoxically or mysteriously, but it also seems right to me to say God, by his own gracious will, pours himself out more fully in some ways and places. The Ark of the Covenant, the tabernacle, sacred spaces, but also in things like an act of love is more beautiful than a painting of a tree. Even a really great painting of a tree. An act of love is more beautiful. Why? God is more fully revealed, or the truth is more clearly spoken.
Yeah, and I'm so with you on that. I just sometimes I'm hearing sometimes people separate the physical from the inner, like the internal. Well, like this inner beauty is more important than the physical. But like you were motioning toward earlier, when Jesus became incarnate, like that inner comes through the physical, and you can't separate those out.
That's right.
And so
it's mediated to us that way.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So God himself even says how I am revealing myself through this tree. And
yeah, that's
you
right.
know, like, and there's something about, like when Paul writes about in Romans, if you pay attention to the tree, you can see aspects of God's divine nature and his eternal order through that perception of the tree. So there's something for us to be paying attention to when we look at a painting of a tree that we must not say, well, that's not as important as me just being loving to somebody. I think there's both importances
I
of
think
both
what I want to say
places.
is one is bigger, but that doesn't mean we just ignore the other. So let me give as I'm always prone to do, let me give a romantic illustration. Yesterday I came home and Jenny was in the kitchen and I think she was doing like the self-cleaning function on the oven or whatever. So the kitchen was kind of a mess, and I saw that it was kind of a mess, and I knew all this disorder is not her favorite thing. And I did the dishes, whatever, because I was trying to love her. And like that, doing the dishes was an act of love and an act of like, look, this is me loving you on display. But then I walked over and put my hand in her hair and kissed her right on the mouth in a sort of like long kiss. And that was a different manifestation and a more intense manifestation of my love for her than doing the dishes. But it's a fool who thinks that you can just ignore the dishes and kiss all the time and see the fullness of love. And so sometimes I think like God is best seen in the burning bush, in Mount Sinai, thick darkness and fire, in, the resurrection or the transfiguration, these blinding moments of God's glory where this intensity happens. But it's relevant that God does not only reveal himself there. He also reveals himself in whenever you give somebody a cup of cold water. So likewise, if all the beauties we encounter are a thunderstorm in the Alps or the sunrise over the ocean, like if these kind of grand things, or like, the first time I saw the Duomo in Florence, I just was like frozen and wept. If that's the only way that we encounter beauty, we won't see the fullness of beauty. Sometimes you also need to see an interesting shaped rock that you pick up, or two colors laid across a flag that look good together, where you're like, oh, look, I'm seeing something different about beauty. Still the same beauty, but I'm seeing something different about beauty in this small and simple way, in this small rivulet that I don't see in the Mississippi River. And that seems right to me too. So it's a way of like both honoring and celebrating and pointing to the necessity of these small beauties without trying to pretend that they're the same thing as these grander beauties. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I'm still rolling that around in my head. I see what you mean as far as he does seem like Christ has these certain revelations in grand ways. But I've also heard of many people, and David Bentley Hart talks about this as far as when Christ is incarnate, like every single thing about him is beauty. And so all of his acts are all of the standard. Like, I don't know if we could look at Christ's life and say, well, this is more beautiful of a manifestation of his glory than this. It's all an appearing of his glory, and we see it in different ways, but I don't know if we can order those.
Okay, that's instructive, because the woman with the issue of blood touches the hem of his garment. It's not even his flesh. It's just the clothes he's wearing. And she's healed by this. Like the presence and power and healing such a God. Of course, it's also her faith. There's a subjective element here too. She both encounters God himself and this clothing that he's mediating his presence through.
Yeah.
And she has an internal subjective quality of faith. And this brings about an encounter of healing and such. On the mountain, Christ is transfigured such that he's shining like the sun, and Peter doesn't get it. Like Peter's subjective experience, his straw is too little.
Yeah.
He's like, let's make 3 tabernacles,
Right.
So that's what I'm trying to get at.
It shows.
you can, if the goal is to quench our thirst, an ocean of pure water is not any more helpful to somebody with a tiny straw than a rivulet. And the woman has more faith than Peter, and she receives what's going on. She encounters more of Christ's beauty, so to speak, in the hem of his garment than Peter encounters in the Transfiguration. But I don't know if that's because, like, what if that woman had been at the Transfiguration? She might have seen the truth. She might have seen more clearly.
So, do you think it's the straw or is it the stream?
I think it's. I'm saying it's
Are
both.
you saying it's
yeah,
both?
I'm saying it's
Okay.
both. Like, if
And
the question is, how much water do we get?
Yeah.
Right? There's two questions here. One is, how much water do we get? And one is, how much water is there? Or, how fast is it flowing? I'm always pushing these metaphors too far.
But if God is, like, going back to what you said earlier, if God is in everything and you can't have little,
There's no
break up
pieces.
little pieces, then I just don't see how we can be consistent in saying that, like, the stream is different. I think we would say our straws are different, our inability to perceive, and, like, we are the flawed instruments. And when we have lesser beauties, it's because it's passing through these flawed instruments. And me as a designer, I'm just a defective instrument, and so I see lesser beauty in certain forms and things like that. But I guess I'm still not quite sure how to say it's not the stream, but it is the stream.
Yeah, that's something I want to say is a both and here. I want to kind of punt to paradox, and maybe that's just sometimes theologians punt to paradox because we're not thinking clearly, and sometimes it's because, oh no, this is a mystery. It's not about Moses. There's nothing about Moses and Moses' perception that makes the ground holy by the burning bush. Like, God says, take your shoes off here, but not 2 mountains over, and it's the same Moses. So it seems like God is doing something different.
Yeah, God creates sacred space, and He creates these thin spaces for us to,
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Like,
yeah.
that must be so. Does that translate? Does that metaphor of presence translate over to beauty?
That's what I was wondering. That's what I was wondering with Craig. Like, how do we get at this question of?
Craig's the one who first brought this up yesterday and prompted the question.
Yeah. And so, I'm not sure myself of trying to sort through this. I know I experience it in different ways, in different degrees, but I just wonder in the eschaton, are we going to be able to eventually, as God reveals Himself upon glory, I know for all of time, we will constantly be having His glory revealed. And so there's no end to all of this. There's no end to God's revealing of His beauty. And so we will keep getting it, like, being hit with all of these different degrees. But I think that's just because we're not the creator. We are the creatures.
So right now you're saying it's just our perception. It's the subjective thing, the straw that is bigger or larger. And we're always dipping it into the same water, an infinite water.
Because we're not God.
That seems okay. I mean, like, that feels right to me in one sense. Like, theologically, that feels consistent. Like, okay, here's my position. But it also seems right to me that God Himself reveals more or clearer or more intense or more full pictures of Himself in some times than in others, but you need the little times, the small beauties, to see the whole thing.
Yeah, or else
too.
we'd all be like lying flat on our face. Like, we couldn't even go outside without, like, if we were hit with all of God's glory at all times, we would He's doing it to protect us. What is that? Deus abscondus, this idea of, like, God reveals through concealing.
Yeah.
And He has to almost conceal His glory in order for us to get those special revelations. And so.
All right, let me try another metaphor. When I want to reveal myself to somebody, I want them to see me. I want to express myself to them. Things like my words. Let's even leave that out. Let's just do physical things. Things like my eyes and my mouth and my hands are very expressive. These are really expressive aspects of me. I can say a lot more with my countenance, the expression of my face, than I can with my shoulders.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a really good point.
But if you only ever saw my face, you never saw my shoulders, you wouldn't see the fullness of how I express myself, And you can think about someone shifting their body posture, and how shoulders communicate, strength and confidence or shame or whatever, right?
Sure.
You can do that with your face too. It's the same inner, let's say, emotion in this case, being expressed. The face expresses it more clearly, but sometimes it's in the movement of a shoulder that you're like, oh, I see something I hadn't seen before from the face.
Yeah.
And I think that I want to make sure there's space to say He intensifies His omnipresence, or he intensifies His omni-beauty. God is all beautiful and everything is beautiful, but He intensifies that, reveals Himself more through, I don't know, let's say, like, the Bible is a clearer, better revelation of God than, a book that I like Les Miserables. I love Les Miserables. I read it. I see God in it. But the revelation of God is not as potent in Les Miserables as it is in the Gospel of John. Why? Well, not just because I'm better at reading John, but because, no, God has done something different through the Spirit in inspiring John and in the church preserving all that kind of stuff. But as soon as I say that, the kind of systematic theologian in my brain wants to go, wait, you careful, you're flirting with partialism. And that's why I feel like I want to go back and forth rather than finding some static points like, here's the answer. I want to say, well, it's this, but it's also its opposite. That feels like a good theological method in general to me, to say we're moving back and forth and finding balance like a pendulum finds balance, rather than like the top card on a house of cards finds balance. There's more stability in the pendulum. But I also know that might just be a way to cover for muddled thinking.
No, I think that's really helpful to be thinking about how we do see him manifest and reveal himself in very special ways, that he even says these are special ways in which I'm revealing myself through the Spirit of God.
Okay, so let me ask you a question that comes out of this, and we might do this into another episode where we explore it more fully. Let's grant that it at least sure seems like some things are more beautiful than others. Sometimes you just get hit with beauty and it just bowls you away. You know, you get tears in your eyes and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Other times you got to sit and wait and attend and look to find it.
Right.
So if we want to acknowledge at least in the pendulum swing, and maybe this is the answer, but we at least want to acknowledge this. God's beauty is present in everything, but we don't see it in everything most of the time. What are some strategies that you would recommend to say to somebody, here's how you get better at seeing it in pine cones? How do we get better at seeing it when it's not so obvious?
Well, this is where, and that's a great question, and this is where I've been stretched personally lately, because if you were to ask me last year, I would have said, take art appreciation and I'll help you perceive things. But I'm just becoming more and more humbled, realizing if it's God that is what we are aiming to perceive, then it's not like taking a class and checking these boxes. Only the work of God, only the work of the Holy Spirit can truly open our eyes to perceiving the beauty that we see and encounter in created works and in God's creation. It's only through us opening ourselves up to the power of the Spirit can we have the eyes to see. So just like people can sit in a Bible class and you can tell them all the right things and you can maybe move away some hurdles and, but in order for them to have a relationship with God, that's got to be them opening themselves up to the power of the Spirit's work. So, that's where I am right now, just realizing I can play a small role in trying to kind of point people to the perception of beauty by sharing my experiences, but it's not as much as pointing to the externals, because I think there's so much internally bound up within beauty that it's multifaceted. You have to have a fully orbed view of beauty in order to kind of perceive beauty through the perfect, beautiful form of Christ that is both crucified Christ and a resurrected Christ. So there's wounds there and there's the healing of wounds. And so it's not this flashy external thing that we just point to and say, look at these principles of design and this is beauty. I don't know.
That seems right to me. And I think I actually feel this a lot of times when I get in conversations about spiritual disciplines, you know, and it's like, oh, we're going to practice these spiritual disciplines and thereby we're going to become holy people, like we've got some technique that gets us what we want.
6 easy steps.
Right. And there's something obviously wrong about that. That can lead into you're manipulating God. If you just pray and fast in this way, then God will show up for you. That's not right. On the other hand, it's pretty foolish to say, look, it's all about God showing up, so I don't bother praying. God will show up and do what he wants to do. Or I never take time to sit in quiet contemplation of beauty because beauty is just from God. So I want to hold in tension this fundamental truth that for the ship to move, the wind has to blow. And that's what drives the ship. But I also want to say, put your sails up, so that you're ready.
Yeah, this is what
that
spiritual
when the winds
disciplines
comes.
are.
And I heard the language you kept saying was open yourself. So let's not think as much about like, how can we make somebody see beauty, but rather what are strategies and techniques and habits and virtues and things we can do to help open ourselves up for when God decides to work, we are ready to receive what he has. What are and this does seem like some of the stuff you do in class,
I do.
right?
Yeah, I do talk about this. I think in our modern, fast-paced culture, I think one of the first things that we need to do is realize that we are not like machines, and it's like until we can set aside our projects and all of our things to do and all of these things that we've got running through our head, until we can not see ourselves as just in this utilitarian way, and I've got to get this done and this done, until we can quiet all of that, then we will not have the space to sit underneath something bigger than ourselves and to really gaze upon its beauty. If we're always thinking that we're in control and that we have to do this and this and this. And so it requires us stilling ourselves and us being able to, with humility, just I leave, up this space and whatever you want to do, and inviting God into this presence and saying, I'm going to clear my schedule. I'm going to just sit and contemplate. So there's an aspect of that, of quieting oneself and kind of like making time and carving out the time for waiting for like God to show up in that time. But there's also being a more tuned in and this expectation of I can walk from here to there and I can perceive God's beauty and expecting to perceive beauty that I think, even if we don't carve out an hour of our day or whatever, that we can just in passing, that we can be paying attention and we can be more tuned in, and not just in a physical way, but also in acts that we perceive of people doing, and acts of love and service, and also artistic works and in creation. So there's also that expectation as well.
I'm making a little list here as you're talking of things that you're saying. So I hear you saying, one, make time.
Make time.
Like this reminds us, we talked about Joshua Bell in the subway, right? If you're in a hurry, you don't even notice that the violin was beautiful. It's when you have time. Kant talks about this too.
Yeah.
There's a famous story. A seminary preacher was teaching a class on preaching, and he was going to teach or something. He was teaching the Good Samaritan, and he told his class, "Listen, we've got to get to the library we have to be there in 6 minutes. So we're going to leave the classroom and go to the library. I really need you to hurry." And he had planted an actor on the way, like on the sidewalk, who'd fallen down and been hurt. And his class, of course, rushed right by and helped him. And when you do the social experiment, the thing that's the biggest difference in whether people stop and help an injured person is, are you in a hurry? Isn't that interesting?
That's fascinating.
So
what
that's
a
about
neat
like
connection.
Right. We're talking about ethics there, but it's the same principle that is
Yes.
to see goodness.
Yeah.
We're going to sometimes slow down. We can't always do this, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes, like if someone's drowning and you're like, I'm making time to smell roses. In ethics, you'll miss out on doing good if you're in a hurry. And in aesthetics here, you'll miss out on beauty if you're in a hurry. That doesn't mean that like we can always be stopping to smell the roses. If someone's drowning, you might not get to see the beautiful thing because you've got to.
Well, that is the
stop
beautiful thing.
No, what I mean is like, let's imagine we've got a piece of art that we want to contemplate, we want to see beauty in.
Yeah.
And like, I'm bracketing out my time for this.
Yeah.
There are times which that's the wrong thing to do. You're going to miss out on the beauty of this, act of salvation.
Right.
Because you're trying to focus time on this. All I'm saying is there's wisdom in this, but wisdom means you're sometimes, if you're so harried and hurried that you're never making time for something. Jesus, like, there are people dying that want him to heal them. And he's like, I'm going away to a lonely mountain to pray all night long. Like there's wisdom in this making time. And the other thing I heard you say, make time for it. And then also have an expectation that is believe it could show up. That sounds like faith to me.
Yeah, that's
like,
true.
Like practicing telling yourself, I believe in beauty. This could show up. And some of that seems like there's a humility, like your art appreciation class. I might need somebody who's been there already to say to me, you can trust this. This piece of art will get the work done if you can develop eyes to see. So sit with it and expect it to be good. as opposed to like someone to walk you through the museum and say, look at this one, right? And you might have missed it if you didn't know, oh, I've got reason to trust that this could do it. Or I'm in a bad mood, I think everything in the world's ugly. You're not going to see it then. You've got to have some faith for this to happen. If I'm thinking about some that have made a difference for me, one is like education made a difference. To be in a community, I don't mean like just like getting smart or something. I mean to listen to a community talk about beauty.
Yeah, and to humble yourself to realize I don't have all the answers.
Yeah, and communities like people who put things in museums or galleries. There's a humility that says, I should go look at that.
Yeah.
Why? Because the consensus has told me it's good.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean it's like always the case. We've certainly seen like trash art in galleries. But there's something right. I mean, I've found I am more sensitive to and aware of and think about beauty more and notice it more, experience it more since I started reading a bunch of books about it.
Yeah.
And teaching classes on it and talking to you about it.
Yeah.
Like that does work for me. Jenny loves plants and flowers and like just loves them. And I started paying attention because I love her. And now I just notice them like that. She's taught me that. There was a sense in which like finding guides, masters, teachers, whether that's individuals or communities or books or institutions that you say, let me humble myself and say, you teach me. Show me. I think that's a big piece of it.
That's so good. And it kind of brings everything full circle because we realize that God has entrusted us as his image bearers to image himself and point others to himself. And that's our role in the church, is to use our gifts and our talents to live in community and point to him. And so what you're expressing is that we can do the same thing when it comes to beauty, that at the end of the day, it is the Holy Spirit that is awakening our hearts. It's not on any individual person that's doing that. We credit God for God's power and God's work, but isn't it incredible that he uses human conduits in order to open that up for that we can open that up for each other. And so I'm so glad that you wrapped all of that up, because I think that's a perfect way to kind of encapsulate what happens when we humble ourselves and listen to others and open ourselves up to the experience of this. Because just by us having these conversations and by me leaning more into this, like my life has become so much better and more enriched because I've been able to listen to the wisdom of other people talking about this.
And I like the education sometimes seems like snobbery, especially art education. It's like training and becoming a snob so you can look down, oh, that's bad. Oh, this.
Right. And I think that's what I want to push back against. Like, I'm not trying to.
No, that's a monstrous sort of thing. And that's like everything good can be perverted, right? But that's a monstrous, but there's something quite right about saying, let me learn to see beauty. And so submitting myself to teachers. In the garden, God puts Adam in the garden and he begins naming things. And when God creates the world, he's always naming things. This is a very human phenomenon. To learn to name things is to say, this is not that. Like, here's a good way to know if you're a painter. If you know the difference in cayenne and scarlet and crimson and magenta and like all these color words, to be like, oh no, those are different things. We've named them. And I think sometimes when you talk about like design principles or even the work we're trying to do theologically here in naming beauty gets at this. And so learning to look for particularities is helpful. One of the things I like to do when I look at paintings, and people do this when they're appreciating, is stand back and see the whole thing and then come up close and look closely at it. Right? And then stand from a different angle and look at it and then move over here. And what you're doing is not just getting different points of view and perspectives, you're looking for the parts of it. You're saying, how does this relate to this? And, you talk about this in artwork in terms of design principles. I read this great book, Braiding Sweetgrass, that's about ecology and plants. And her training as a botanist helps come in and she can see things because she understands all the pieces and how they work together. There's something to me that's right about that, like in letting the whole wash over you and then doing the work of naming and being specific and categorizing that's helpful. Now, maybe that's just because I love lists, let's make top 5 of this or whatever, but I think there's something very human about this and something that we do rightly with whether it's artistic beauty, natural beauty, the beauty of actions and things, to try and spell out, well, here's what that is, and here's what that is. And I think that's one of the reasons that we have so many different words to describe different kinds of beauty: cute, pretty, fitting, startling, splendid, like we could keep going on. And there's tiny shades where we're naming, this is a piece, not the whole, that kind of thing. So like learning those words and learning to think in those little categories to me is a helpful thing to do too, to see it better.
Right. Yeah. I love the connection there with naming of the animals and how that's the exciting thing in my field of being able to lean into beauty and aesthetics and just being able to wrap language around these different nuances within this whole field. And so, yeah, it's exciting, and it's never exhausted because God is never exhausted and his beauty is never exhausted.